I started the recording. Bryce, you can go ahead.
Thanks, fella. Welcome everybody to the August 20th Operator Framework OLM Working Group meeting. We'll kick it off going through the briefs and RFCs under review. Looks like cluster catalog status conditions is under review. And looks like that's Ankita, Rashmi, and Jordan as the authors. If you folks have anything that you want to talk about on this, go for it.
Well, see, just wanted to call out that the feedback due date is by Friday this week, so if folks wanted to take a look at it, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up again in today's meeting.
So, thanks for bringing it up. Looks like some discussion topics. Joe, can remaining performance and scale work move to 1.x scope? Is Joe in the call?
Yep. So essentially the question is, it seems like, in Edmund, it looks like you're here, so help me out if you know the answer to this, but it seems like we did at least the first pass sort of performance test that we thought would be sufficient to say we're good enough for 1.0.0. And we're at the point now where we're looking at now adding benchmarks and other sorts of things that'll help prevent us from regressing on our performance. And I guess what I'm suggesting is the things that help prevent us from regressing aren't really 1.0.0 blockers. Those could go in afterwards. And so I wonder if we can essentially say that the initial scope of the performance and scale is done. We don't think we found anything critical, so there's nothing left to do from a 1.0.0 perspective.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment on where we are.
Okay. All right. So, is there anything specific that's worth capturing? Like, I guess the next question is just from a bookkeeping standpoint, do we just move this epic over and out of scope, or is there anything worth capturing separately that we want to say, like, oh, there was a 1.0.0 epic. Here's what we found. It's closed, and here's the follow-up work.
I was supposed to start working on, excuse me. I was supposed to start working on the epic or rather RFC or brief after, getting a good grasp of what's going on. And yeah, I lost track of that. So it's something that I can work on and just have everything documented as far as my observations. And yeah, I'll update the issue with that.
Okay.
Joe, just one thing that I did add, based on the way that I think we discussed it last community meeting, that this optimization for the provided service account, we moved out of scope of the epic that this was attached to and put it in performance and scale.
Yeah.
I also went ahead and we can discuss it later, but I added this to the proposed release blockers as well, in case we didn't feel it fit in the performance and scale. But there's already a PR up to resolve that as well, that we'll get into later as well. But
yeah, I thought we landed on that issue also being not necessarily a release blocker. But
I thought we landed on it is a release blocker because of the poor UX.
Okay, so it seems like what I'm suggesting is, from a performance and scale perspective, from what Edmund has been doing, I think like the rest of what like the benchmark tests and all of that, I guess it seems like we're saying that's not a 1.0.0 blocker. So what I'd like to be able to do somehow is extract that bit from the 1.0.0 scope. And what I thought that would mean is that essentially that entire epic would move to 1.x. And then
Yeah,
and
go
then
ahead.
if there's like any bit of essentially like documenting what we found that we want to leave in 1.0, that would be fine as well.
Joe, we have also a 1.1 epic. What's a target also? So do you want to move to 1.1?
I would probably move it to just 1.x, and we can, I don't know if we've even had a discussion about what do we want to actually pull in for 1.1 yet.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
So does this seem reasonable? I put performance regression testing is not in scope for 1.0. Let's move the epic to the scope for 1.x. Any must-have performance improvements for 1.0.0 are created as a separate issue and track
Yeah.
them to the 1.0 release blockers epic.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay. Edmund, do you feel comfortable moving things around and making sure that any must-haves are created under the release blocker epic?
What are we talking of, the issue that was added to that performance and regression stuff?
I mean,
Ticket.
if there's nothing else from that epic that's a must-have for 1.0,
Mhm.
I can handle that. That's already in the 1.0 proposed release blockers.
Okay.
I can just update my comment to say that it's not in the scope of this epic then.
And
Yeah.
Edmund, correct me if I'm wrong, but there were no other performance issues that we found that haven't already been addressed.
No. At this point, I haven't identified any performance blockers. The main thing that, or the main takeaway that I still had left was we wanted to get rid of pandas in the GitHub actions or workflow. And so I'd just started playing with GoTo, which is a Golang data frame implementation. So yeah, for the most part, everything else seems to be working fine.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's part of the regression, like performance regression testing that's not in 1.0.0 scope. So that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. So cool. Nothing else to track then for 1.0. Bryce, you just moved it to 1.x. So I think my question has been answered, and I think we're good.
All right, cool. Moving on to the next topic. Adam, should/can we drop hybrid support from Helm operator plugins?
Yeah, I just linked to the repo. So Joe and I talked about this a few weeks ago when we were having issues with operator controller needing X set of dependencies and other projects that depend on the Helm plugin needing Y versions of those dependencies. So in order to make that happen, it was 2 or 3 days of work for both of us to make the changes and release 3 or 4 different versions of the plugin. After looking into that, there was only 3 operators, downstream operators that use that are published to catalogs, and they're basically just published by our team to evangelize the hybrid concept. So I created a POC and showed it to Joe. So that's kind of where we're at. To remove that, it would basically remove the dependency on KubeBuilder and some of the other K8 dependencies. We would be able to freely move those as we actually need to. And then also this could be removed out of operator SDK as well to simplify the dependencies there.
And there's another benefit, which is that when we make releases of Helm operator plugins, we wouldn't have to do separate like release prep or post-release PRs. So it would turn into just push a tag essentially, which is really sort of the impetus behind why I started asking these questions, because we were realizing that there was a fairly heavy lift to do the release there that for the last couple of releases we had just forgotten about, and things were just in a very weird state.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought I forgot about that. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it's used at all. It's at an alpha version, and it's not being adopted at all. And it would make our lives easier. So I'm happy to raise that POC PR with a couple of changes that Joe and I had talked about. Happy to do that within the next couple of week or so here, if we want to move in that direction. Because also there's other people right now in the community trying to move to later versions of KubeBuilder, which have their own implications as well. So us kind of making a decision there makes those PRs go away, which would be nice as well.
Yep, I think that makes sense. It sounds like there's a lot of upside to this, so I'd say let's do it.
There is another mitigation that, like, if we do this and someone says, why, and can you please not do it, we could just put the actual scaffolding bits in a separate repo, or we could ask them if they were interested in starting to maintain it, which would actually be more aligned with how KubeBuilder works anyway. Like if you look at KubeBuilder versus controller runtime, there's like one repo that has all the scaffolding code that scaffolds stuff that uses controller runtime. We could do something similar, or the community could do something similar here, where if someone is really interested in this hybrid plugin, they could make a repo that does the KubeBuilder equivalent, where like you don't actually have the library code in the same repo, you have it separate. Then you can sort of decouple the versioning of the things. That was the big problem, is that we had to like couple the versions of these things, and didn't work very well. But I would agree with Adam. I think we should just drop the hybrid plugin support because it seems like it's unused. And if we hear complaints, then we can say, here's what we think the community should do if there's someone that's willing to maintain it.
Okay.
Anyone else have any thoughts or objections besides Bryce and Joe?
Do we want to announce it to the community?
Yeah, I could do that. Once the PR is up. Cool thing. Thanks everyone. I'll have a PR in the next week probably.
Sweet. Thanks, Adam. So next few topics are from me. The first one is I've got a fairly meaty PR that needs review. It essentially fixes a few bugs around establishing watches / informers for cluster extension, and that way we can manage that content. So when a change is made to it, we requeue the cluster extension that owns those resources to be re-reconciled. There was some bugs where The resources that were managed by the cluster extension were missing the expected labels. That was something that I had accidentally removed in a large refactor, so that adds the functionality back in this PR. We optimized the caching layer so that fixes the follow-up, the performance follow-up for the provided service account epic. So that way we check what informers need to be stopped and removed and which ones need to be started and added to cache. Previously, we blew everything away and then recreated it. Now we're kind of maintaining state and identifying which ones we need to remove and stop, which ones we need to start and add. And then that way we're only doing operations on the diff between the resources that would be managed. Now, additionally, whenever sync errors are encountered, any informers that were able to successfully sync are still added to cache, so they don't have to be recreated the next time around. Additionally, we now add a finalizer so that the cluster extension, when the cluster extension is deleted, we get rid of the cache associated with it and we stop all the informers. This also adds a new managed condition that's set to false when there are problems setting up the informers, and true when all the informers are successfully started. Previously, we didn't provide any information other than logging to the operator controller manager logs, issues with the permissions for establishing informers. Now we're able to capture those errors, stop that informer, return that to the user via this new managed condition on the cluster extension. Just as an example, I think Sid had reviewed, and this is an example of when there's a permission error, the status condition is set like this. So we get a management failed in the managed type, and we have failed to list API extensions, custom resource definitions. Whenever it's successful, it says content is successfully being managed. So when it's set to true and it's successful, any changes made to the underlying managed content are trigger re-reconciliation of the cluster extension, which results in reconciling the changes to the managed content back to the expected. But essentially, just wanted to call it out that needs reviews. It's a pretty big PR. Gets pretty deep in client Go and informers and caching and stuff like that. So for folks interested, feel free to take a look. I'm also happy if folks prefer to set up some time to kind of synchronously go through the PR. So whatever folks prefer to get this PR in, let me know.
Yeah. So, but I started looking into this, but obviously, I haven't got enough time to go through everything. But yeah, I'm definitely interested reviewing and learn this stuff.
Cool. If there's nothing else on that topic, we can go ahead and move to the next one. This one is for the cluster extension V1 API review epic. I've gone ahead and created the work items and a project view. I did not get a chance to throw the project view link in there just yet. But this is the project view. These are all the work items. I think Josh Manning is already working on this issue here, but I wasn't able to assign it. So Josh, if you're on the call, feel free to go and assign yourself to this issue.
All right, we'll do.
Sorry.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I've been working on that. So I've got a branch that builds pass all end-to-end tests. I got that going like late Friday afternoon. I was out sick yesterday, but I noticed, Bryce, that you changed the RFC. When was it, like resolution config, the name of that union, to source config? I'll have to go back through and update all those references. And I am lacking a couple. I need to come up with a couple just quick unit tests just to validate the CEO that it works as expected. I was toying around with those X validation strings just to get one that would work. And I had to put it on the X validation on the resolution config object itself or union itself. So that's the only way I can make it work. So, but anyway, that's moving along. I should have a PR here very shortly. So.
All right, cool. I'll go ahead and move that over to implementing. And then, like I said, I think we still have some of the proc commands that you can use. So you can do like /assign and then your GitHub handle, and it'll assign you in a GitHub comment. But I wasn't able to find your proper GitHub handle to assign it to you. So other than that, there's a lot of these issues. If we go to here, I've labeled them all as Epic /v1 API, as well as there's a bunch of them that I think are pretty good first issues. So if anyone's looking for some kind of low-hanging fruit to get some first contributions to the project, most of these are good first issue. The only one that I didn't put one on is converting from a single channel to allowing a list of channels, because I think that involves some fiddling around with resolution that might not be totally trivial. So the rest of these should be good to go. So if you're looking for some work, feel free to go through and pick some up and start throwing up some PRs.
Hey, thanks, but this is awesome. Thanks a lot.
So then the next item is suggesting we spend some time going through the 1.0 epics view and making sure that we have everything kind of scoped out and is in the right state for our 1.0 release. And then seeing about going through and making sure that we have all the issues associated with these epics to be thrown into a GitHub milestone for v1.0.0. So this is to track at a more granular level all the issues needed for the 1.0 release to be cut. And then once we have that, I think we are in good shape to kind of look at all the work that's there and set a target date for when that release is going to be cut. What do folks think?
No, this is, as I said, I think this is good, I think, right? I mean,
sorry, I've been trying to multitask a little bit. One question I have on this is the support installing bundles from a private registry. Did we talk about the scope of that one yet?
I think yesterday we decided that it's going to be out of the 1.0 scope to focus, because things are more tightly coupled to how we interact with image registries. So I think we decided to move this to the 1.x scope.
Okay. Yeah. So should we go ahead and do that?
Yeah. Whoops. Okay, so that should be updated. So that should be taken out. Is Todd here in the call?
yeah, I think that should be in progress, right? I think this Todd, I think Todd is here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the
Todd's
RCs are
here.
done.
He's
Looks like
having
there's-
trouble getting his.
Yeah, I think probably.
Hold on, yes, I'm here. Sorry, just we're actually in Westford, so we're trying to figure out the conference room stuff. Yes,
Okay, sweet.
and your screen is very small here.
So the minimal controls for selecting catalogs to resolve from, it looks like that Epic has subtasks, and it looks like there's some that are starting to get done. So I've gone ahead and moved it to implementing.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yep.
Sounds good. I'll move the V1 API review for operator controller also into implementing, since there's now items that can be worked. And Josh is working on one of them. I think Pear wasn't going to be able to make it today, but the v1.0 documentation epic. He gone ahead and created issues for a bunch of different items to be documented. So I think that this is probably good to go ahead and move into implementing as well.
Yes, and I think he has already sent a PR, right? About the same. I'm not sure if it's upstream or something.
For a couple issues, I think. Additionally, as part of the documentation work, I think all of these also still needs docs and are in the appropriate state. I actually think this one actually looks like it is done. So we can move the CRD upgrades to fully done and completed. For the folks that are able to, does it look like that these are in the right state based on your knowledge of the documentation?
Also, can you expect, like, is this a fair expectation that whoever is worked on that particular epic, maybe whoever has that decent knowledge on that particular epic, can they contribute the documentation for that epic?
I think that's reasonable. I think it's also a good opportunity for folks that are interested in learning a little bit more about some of the features that are implemented in OLMv1 that didn't contribute to those features. I think it's a good opportunity to take some time to get a deeper understanding of some of the features and technical decisions within OLMv1 by writing some of those docs.
Yeah. Do
Because
we
I know,
have, God, sorry, right.
I was going to say, I know some of the folks that have been put on some of these epics, we didn't have a clear docs pipeline at the time. So I think a few of us are working on other epics as well. So I don't know how we want to prioritize jumping over to writing documentation, or if we want to leave it open as a good opportunity for new contributors to come in and write some docs.
Should we, I feel like just assuming that the original Epic person is going to take care of it is not great because there's like this implicit assumption, and it'd be better from our timing perspective if we somehow just have a list of here are all the remaining issues. And then we can make sure that we're burning that down. And if we assign the same person, then great. But if not, I think the thing that I want to avoid is making an assumption that some issues are being worked.
Right. My next question was actually similar, that do we have in all of these epics, do we have issues created for documentation, and is it assigned to someone or not?
While Bryce is typing, I think, Bryce, you made separate issues for the needs docs epics. Is that right?
So all the needs docs epics should have an associated documentation issue. So, right, provided service account documentation. This one is, I edited your original description, but I think we decided to utilize the underlying helm management, and this calls out that we need to document that behavior.
Is there a separate issue for that yet, or was that part of it?
I think that we decided this entire epic is going to be essentially a docs epic, so I'd like to capture the documentation for that. I think this one still has a docs ticket that's open. This one, I think I had asked if we still need docs, and I think we need to, looks like you said we need to come through and see if we have anything about the old extension API. So we can still do that and verify whether or not this needs to be moved to done. Looks like this still has an open docs ticket for it as well. So all of these have separate docs issues. It looks like we've got work items for everything in each of these epics. So if it makes sense, I can start going through and grabbing some of the items in this list and I'll do it separately from the call, throwing them into that milestone, unless we feel like we want to sit through that at the moment.
I think that can be done offline, personally. One thing that occurs to me, the ones that are in progress, do those all have epic or stories or issues for docs?
Does not look like APIs for catalog D has one. The operator controller API review does not have one.
And
Minimal controls
does not have one.
No. I guess for the API ones, I think we could probably put documentation issues to make sure any references to the APIs are updated appropriately, like any example YAML or anything like that. But I don't know that we even have any documentation explicitly on the APIs.
Yeah. So I think we need that though, right?
Yeah. Do we have it captured? Looks like we have a docs catalog D and operator controller API reference here. Maybe we should move these issues into the scope of the API review epics.
Yeah, either way, it's probably okay if we link one to the other. I wouldn't want to do those until after those, after we've merged all the changes for whatever we're going to change.
Yeah, that's my only reasoning for moving them over to the appropriate epics, because they can be kind of put in the task list.
Yeah.
As like prioritized. So like right now, all of this stuff is fairly parallelizable, but I think we can put like the docs task as like the last thing and say like this is the last thing to do after all tasks have been completed or something.
Yeah.
Do we want to add a note in the specific issues saying this needs to wait for the other things to first finish, then we should do this?
Sure. For now, I'll edit this just to make sure. So this is reference 1, 2, so 2 and 3. Reference 2 and 3. Be done after all the API. Okay. So at least for now, if we don't end up moving them, there is at least a note on this issue that these should be done after those epics are completed. I can go back through. I'll mark as an action item. So I'll add that as an action item for me to take. Lala, I think we've got at least the all the epics kind of that we need for 1.0 taken care of. I can do the milestone offline. And then maybe once that's done, we can have a conversation either offline or push it to the next community meeting to set an actual date.
Yeah.
That way we can visualize, we can like take a look at the milestone and say, this is everything in the milestone. And then, I don't know, maybe we like t-shirt size stuff and say, this is how long we think that these are accomplishing this is going to take. And then we set that as the date.
Yeah, no, sounds great.
Okay. I put, if we have time, let's talk SIG. So last meeting, I proposed.
Before that, Bryce, since we were just talking about APIs, I added this at the end because I forgot about it until we were talking about it.
Cool.
So there's these API epics, and we're basically, those just cover the content of the API, right? Like what fields we're going to have in them, but it doesn't actually talk about where they should live, right? Because right now, catalog D's APIs live in catalog D, and operator controller lives in operator controller. And any application that currently depends on operator framework APIs that's going to need new and old APIs is going to have to pull in 2 additional projects for that, which could then have unintended or will have unintended, consequences of that. Different Kubernetes versions, just fatter application in general, and have runtime code in them as well, which is not ideal. So there was a Slack thread I started a couple days ago with Kevin, and I think Joe might have chimed in on there as well. I would personally like to see them live in the same repo that the old APIs live in. I realize that that is not the cleanest repo, but it makes dependencies easier for applications that currently rely on that, because then they have access to old and new directly. But yeah, I just kind of want to start the conversation around that, because I feel like that needs to happen before 1.0. That way other applications can also prepare for potential changes.
Yeah, this is.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bryce.
I was going to say my preference is that we continue to keep them in the repos that their controllers are located in, because I think having them in the APIs specifically in a separate repo, anytime we want to go make changes to the API that are also going to result in changes to the logic within the controller, you're going to have to go update API, cut a release, go back, update the dependency on the API repo to the new release, update the changes, and then also operator controller is now pulling in a dependency on old API versions as well. Not that it would be using them, but it would still have it in the dependency tree, those APIs. I think that there's potentially other solutions we could do to simplify how the dependencies are pulled from the operator controller and catalog D repositories, such that it's like minimal dependency import, like pulling in minimal dependencies for projects that depend on those APIs.
Hey, here's a maybe very general question. What is our API graduation intention? Like we're still V1 Alpha 1 right now. Are we intending to graduate to V1 Beta 1 for the 1.0 release?
It's going to be V1, I think, for the 1.0 release.
Yeah, we're going to graduate straight to V1. Is that tracked anywhere? I guess the reason I'm asking the question is because what you just described, Bryce, I think is fair when we're making lots of changes to the APIs, right? Like I can update the fields as I'm making a pull request because I want to be able to do all that quickly. But in my mind, like once we graduate to this is publicly released and supportable, we should probably make it hard to make API changes. And to me, it seems like a reasonable trade-off to say that the API itself either lives in a separate project or a separate module or a separate something that has totally separate requirements for merging than the project itself.
Yeah. There's other ways maybe that we could do that. Like we could have a check in GitHub Actions that if you change anything under the APIs directory, it fails. And then it wouldn't be a required check, but it would be like, oh, hold on a second, I need to take a close look here. I'm also partial to Bryce's opinion. I think like there are a bunch of valid API changes that can be made. Where you want to, like, one of the things that I feel like we've had to do is like, oh, we make an API change thinking it's the right thing. We make a release for it, and then we go and implement something, an operator controller. And hopefully we wouldn't do this because we would set it all up and test it and verify. But you could imagine something getting all the way merged and released, and then we try to actually start using it to actually implement the API. And it's like, oh, that actually didn't work quite right. It should have been, a pointer versus not a pointer, and then what, right? Like, ugh, now we've already made a release of it. So I don't know. It's definitely a complex, nuanced problem.
I think my counter to your point, Kevin, around like we shouldn't really be making a bunch of changes once we go V1. I think I agree that we shouldn't be making a bunch of breaking changes, but we have known features that we intend to expand the surface of the API. That as part of like the operator controller V1 API review. Like if you go to the RFC, I have in the benefit section an entire analysis of all the changes that we intend to make to the API and how the proposed stabilization that when we go into V1, the expansion is non-breaking changes. So like to Joe's point, like we're going to still be expanding this API and kind of iterating on it and having that potential for, like Joe said, of, oh, we made this change, we released it, and now it's not the right thing. I think that makes it more difficult to kind of iterate past 1.0. And I think we can still, like Joe said, have some of those validations in place that are like,
Yeah,
maybe
my intention is not to say we should make development on these things hard, but my intention is to say, like, if you're gonna merge a change into the API, we should be very clear about what the compatibility we're defining is there in terms of clients who consume it, right? Because the reason that Adam's asking this question is because what happens when there's a client that uses the API or imports it? And I think we should be extremely intentional about that. So whether we do it in the same repository or not, I don't think I care. But what I do care about is that we treat API changes much differently. And like if the concern is just, oh, well, it'll be harder to test, like I don't know that that's by itself to me a good reason not to do it.
Yeah, so I think I have similar opinions as Kevin. As we should have, I don't know, Kevin. Yeah, so basically, whenever we change the API, it should be very explicit, and we should know that this PR is changing the API, and then making sure that in the review we are aware of it. It doesn't break any backward compatibility, things like that. So it should not be kind of a change which we did not notice and we merged it, but it should be very explicit. That's the goal.
I think there are multiple goals, and we're not really talking about, like, I think Adam started this out as, I want to make sure there's a single place I can import from. And we moved to, I want to make sure that we don't change our API in an unexpected way.
Right.
I think there's just multiple goals, and it might make sense for us to try to, before we talk about what we're going to do, we should maybe try to write down what all the goals are and what all the ways we can meet those goals are. Because otherwise I feel like we're sort of just talking in circles and not really answering the real question. And I don't know, like, I don't know if I would say that single place to import all APIs related to a specific set of projects is actually a goal. I would probably say, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, the goal is to minimize side effects of dependency imports, right?
Yeah, I mean, single place makes that easier.
It does, yeah.
But the goal is to, for a generic way of phrasing it, I think this will be generic of, is to have a place to pull an API in that has no business logic in it. And right, like give me the API, because if you're giving me business logic as well, that has unintended consequences for the consumer.
Yep, exactly. Totally agree. And that is part of the, at least that's part of the OpenShift API conventions that I think we should try to write some sort of tests to make sure we don't do that. Like make sure there are no functions and like no extra stuff if there's a way to unit test for that. But I think that's part of what our goals are as part of the those API reviews too. So I think we're aligned on that. I think the one thing that I would like to be able to do here that I think is probably just impossible is get rid of the Kubernetes um, dependencies from the API, but that's just not possible, right? Because there's like the API meta, there's object meta. So like you're at the very least, you're going to be importing API machinery, and you might also be importing API itself if you embed any core APIs in these APIs. So I don't think there's any way to get around, well, okay, now we've got to have all of our dependencies aligned on the Kubernetes version in at least in a compile time compatible way.
I think that's fine. Sorry, Kevin, I know you have a question. I think that's fine because any consumer that's consuming these APIs is going to also be consuming Kubernetes stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like what else are you doing with these APIs that are going to be outside of Kubernetes?
Yeah, I'm mainly thinking of the problems that we've had with Operator SDK, where it's like there's 10 different repos that we import, all of which consume and depend on Kubernetes. And it seems like it's been hard to do dependency bumps in Operator SDK because we've got to go around to all those different places and make sure they're updated far enough that we don't have compile time problems. So the more we can minimize that, the better. But I just don't know if that's really feasible. So maybe it's not worth trying to optimize for.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable problem to be concerned with. I just want to make sure that I articulate like the reason why we have the API repo in the first place wasn't, it was to create an intentional release cadence for the APIs, which we didn't have when we were doing very ad hoc development on the OLM repo. And there were lots of projects that were maintained by different disparate sets of people who cared about the compatibility of those APIs. I think a module that allows you to import the APIs by itself, where we make sure we're very clear about the life cycle of that. I think that makes perfect sense to me. I'm not advocating for us to try to jump through lots of hoops in that sense. I just want to make sure that like whatever we do, we maintain that sense of awareness, because right now, all the developers in this whole project are all working towards 1.0.0. But 6 months from now, that might not be true. We might have broken up into lots of separate things that are solving separate problems. And when that happens, not everybody might be on top of like, what are the API changes that are happening here and why? And we should make very careful consideration and not accidentally break people because we decided we could merge something.
Yeah, so it sounds like another goal here is like explicit compatibility checks and basically fail CI, like disallow checks that break compatibility somehow.
Yeah.
And I do think that this is a 1.0.0 question, because like where that API is imported from can't change after 1.0.0. Otherwise, that's a new major version, essentially. I mean, I guess we could just fork it somewhere else and say import from this other place in the future, and we'll never change the old one again. But I do think it's probably worth spending a little bit of time trying to figure out where we want it to be. so that we don't have that problem. Essentially, like deleting an API from like this is from a Go project perspective, right? If you delete a struct that's exported, that's break and change because someone might be importing that. So like we couldn't, for example, put things in catalog D and operator controller to start with and then move them over somewhere else and delete them from catalog D and operator controller without going to 2.0 if we're following Simber. Which I think we should.
Cool. Based on the current discussion, I tried to capture appropriate goals. Do these seem along the lines of what we're looking for?
Yeah, I guess there's like this other aspect of this conversation, which is those are the goals that we want to have. We don't have to do, like, we don't have to meet both of those goals for 1.0.0, but we want to structure things for 1.0.0 such that those goals are attainable somewhat quickly, probably. So I do think somehow we need to talk about, okay, well, based on those goals, what do we want to do right now? And I don't know, we only have 4 minutes left, so I don't think we'll get to it, but maybe we should make another 1.0.0 issue for settling on the 1.0.0 API structure.
Yeah, I think that's no, okay. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think we also probably, if we don't already have one, need to create an issue specifically about bumping the APIs to V1.
I think we do have those.
Okay.
I missed that one in the operator controller V1 API review epic, but I'll add one real quick.
Okay. And Jordan, I think you have that, right?
Sorry, here I'm guilty of multitasking. What was the question?
Do we have a story or an issue for moving catalog D to, yeah, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for your statement, Joe, before or after V1, I would second very close to, right? You know, V1.
Yeah. Basically, like I would probably say for the compatibility checks, I would be very hesitant to make any changes whatsoever in the API without some sort of compatibility checking to make sure that we're not introducing a breaking change. And that there's like a bunch of features that Bryce was talking about that were let's go add some more stuff to the API. So I think like depending on what ends up in the 1.1 set of epics, if any of those require API changes, then pulling in something that implements compatibility pre-merge checks is part of that work. I think we'll probably pretty much hit the first goal as part of the 1.0.0 thing, because like we're going to import it from wherever we decide we're going to land it for 1.0.0. And that's where hopefully it'll just be forever.
Does it make sense to put them in the scope of the API review epics?
Yeah, probably.
So it sounds like maybe.
So I have a different opinion on that one there, because I can see from a subject grouping perspective that it would be good to do it, but I could also see that maybe those enforcements might not be required for a 1.0.0 release. And grouping them together means that you can't close that epic until all of those things have been done, right?
I think it probably is something that needs to happen for 1.0.0. Because if we don't get it right, then we have to move stuff around, and moving stuff around usually means breaking change, which would mean V2. or at least a very awkward set of deprecations, and we're not going to touch this anymore and move it over there, and it might as well be a V2. I can also see the argument of it's sort of orthogonal. One thing is talking about how do we want to structure the fields. Another thing is talking more high level, like where do we want this entire thing to live? And they're not quite the same.
Yeah, I guess I would just, my perspective is trying to avoid having an epic that's move this to a certain location, or like how we handle that when we already have epics for handling the APIs. But if folks feel more comfortable with that, I think that's reasonable. Just because I think doing a separate epic also, based on our processes, we should do a brief and RFC associated with those. I don't think we need to, but
Yeah, I don't believe that the brief and RFC are necessarily incumbent for having created an epic here. And I guess speaking as an individual, it makes more sense for me. Right now we have separate epics for both of the major components, and an additional epic that says, hey, once we're finished with both of these components, we want to make sure that we do the same thing for both of these and coordinate it. Makes some sense.
Sure. Okay, so that should be handled in the 1.0 scope. Joe, can I throw an action item at you to create an epic for this to be in the 1.0 scope?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. So with that, we're 2 minutes over. So I will call it, and we can move these two discussions to next week. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, everyone.